So I'm delighted to welcome today to our conversation Jim Joseph. Jim is the global president of BCW. He's also the recently elected chairman of the PR Council. We're delighted to call him a faculty member, a member of our community at NYU SBS. He's also an author and a blogger. And most importantly, since he writes a lot about it, he's a wonderful dad. So welcome, Jim, to the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you.
Yeah. Well, I'm always intrigued, when we have speakers on, just to get a sense of how they got to where they got, especially since we're often talking to a group of students who are often intrigued by, what it takes to get to the top, so to speak. So maybe you share with us a little bit of background and, how you found yourself where you are today. So.
It's kind of funny, actually, because I was one of those kids at a pretty early age that just knew that I wanted to go into marketing. I used to read the back of the cereal boxes during breakfast, and I would look at the print ads in the magazines and not the articles, and I'd study the television commercials. And I was always fascinated at how they would come up with those slogans and how they knew how to write that copy, even though I didn't call it copy, and how they took the photographs. I was just fascinated by it, and knew that I wanted to go into marketing, whatever marketing is. So, set on the career path to do that, started out client side in brand management, very traditional brand management at Johnson & Johnson. And then through the course of my career, I've run lots of different kinds of agencies: advertising, digital, CRM, promotion, now public relations, which in my book, it's all marketing. We like to draw lots of distinctions about how different the disciplines are, but they're all pretty similar, quite honestly.
Yeah. I'm so pleased to hear you say that, Jim, because I get into trouble with my PR colleagues when I say stuff like that. But there's clearly a convergence at many levels in the industry, and we're all ultimately serving the same business growth purposes. So
Exactly.
it's an important distinction. Well, fantastic. And Jim and I had a great privilege. I think we were on a panel together or sort of hanging out. I can't remember what, at Cannes last summer. So
That's right.
I just enjoy every encounter with Jim. So we're here sort of to talk about marketing, communications, and leadership in an age of coronavirus and COVID. And and while at some point, hopefully, that conversation won't seem as relevant or as timely, it does seem to me that there's lots of important lessons that we're all learning about this experience. So lessons for us as marketers, lessons for us as students of marketing or teachers of marketing and PR, etc. So I wondered if I could ask you, maybe just to look backwards at first and say, we've been through a number of different kind of crises in the past, and shocks to the economic system and to the health system, etc. And I wondered if you felt there was anything, that you draw on or you've learned from the past. What stood out to you from the past?
Well, one thing that I definitely hold hope for, having gone through other crises, in the last 10, 15 years, certainly, is we do come back. We really do. And this time around, it feels almost insurmountable, and it feels like the end of the tunnel is so far away. But we do come back. We're not going to come back the same way. March 2020 is not going to suddenly reappear again when this is over, which sounds so bizarre to say because it was such a little time ago, actually, when we weren't going through this. But we do come back. Although I think we're going to come back differently this time. And I think there have been some pretty permanent shifts that we've seen as brands and as marketers. And part of the lesson learned from going through these kinds of crises is to recognize the shifts. And probably one of the biggest ones that I've seen and been very much a part of and have very much enjoyed, quite honestly, are the brands really focusing their efforts on helping communities, stepping away from the products and services that they offer, although they're still offering them in many cases, but stepping away from promoting them and deciding how they can repurpose their assets to help, to help in communities, to help give back, to give supplies, or even just boost morale. There's nothing wrong with that, by spending resources just to boost morale. So I think that's a big lesson learned that we're going to continue to see when we do come back.
Do you think speaking both as a marketer and a PR person, I've had these discussions with folks at Coke and other brands. How important is it to get credit for those actions versus just knowing you have done them? How are you
I think
counseling your colleagues, your clients?
it's incredibly important to get credit. I think when you look back, I've been around for a while. 20 years ago, you would never take credit for doing
Right.
CSR or charity or community work. It was almost seen as, you stay humble. You do the work, but you don't tell anybody. And that has dramatically changed, mostly because, and this is kind of how I view all marketing, you take your cue from your consumers. Consumers want to know. They want to know what you are doing to give back. They want to know what you're doing to contribute. They want to know where you stand on certain issues. And they're making their decisions based on that. So it's not so much whether you should take the credit or not take the credit. You have to,
Yeah.
because consumers are asking.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And to some extent, it's a much noisier, sort of messy media environment. So they won't necessarily find out if you don't. But then
Right.
I guess the question, and you've probably seen the same mashup as I saw on LinkedIn a couple of weekends ago of all the different brands, all of their ads in one long ad, and you know, and it was unfair at some level because it was hard not to the I think what was famously called the sea of sameness. But how are you helping brands think through how to be different? Yes, I mean, how can you do the things you described, but at the same time be authentic or differentiated?
That video was quite shocking when you saw it kind of all rolled together. And I think my takeaway and what we've been talking to clients about, from a purely marketing perspective, it showed the power of being first. The first brands that came out and did those things and talked about unprecedented times and talked about new normal and talked about the crisis we were going through, they got a lot of credit for coming out first, putting their businesses aside for a second and really trying to help. And it shows that when you then later wait and follow and jump in, then you're likely to get sort of clumped into a sea of sameness and sentiment might move on.
Hmm.
Reading lots of stuff from consumers saying, I don't want to hear about the unprecedented times. I don't want to hear about the crisis. I know. I'm
Right.
living in it right now. You don't have to remind me, but you can remind me how you're going to help me get out of it. And when things do go back to something, my kids go back to school and I go back to an office or to a business that's been closed, how are you going to help me then? So I think that the lesson learned there, because I always love lessons learned, is stay on top of it and listen and be out there, if not first, be out there early so that you can really be contributing right from the beginning and you will get credit for it.
Right. Do you think there's something qualitatively different about this experience, this crisis, than ones we've encountered in the past? What one of your colleagues, Fred Garcia, who teaches in our PR program and an
Right.
expert on crisis communications, has been talking about this as really sort of 7 crises all happening at once. Economic health, mental health. I mean, it's a whole series. Do you see this as a different kind of situation, or do you think that you can sort of model it in your mind on things that have happened in the past and how we worked our way through those?
I think it is absolutely different, and really probably for 2 main reasons. The first is that everybody is affected. There
Mm,
is not a single human being on the planet that is shielded from it. And most crises we've gone through in the past, you wouldn't say that. It didn't affect everybody, maybe not equally, because there are
right.
certain economic differences for sure, but there's no one who can run away from the health side of this, and really no one who can run away from even the economic impact of it. Everybody
Right.
is suffering, maybe not equally, but everybody is suffering. So no one is spared, if you will. And then the second big difference is the level of uncertainty is just overwhelming. Most crises that we've been through, you could see, as I said earlier, the light at the end of the tunnel. You could see the curve it was going to take. You could see, like, okay, after a few quarters, we'll get through this. It's temporary. In your heart and soul, you knew it was temporary. You're just going to muster through it. This one, the uncertainty is mind-boggling. There's really no way to know where it goes. And everything we're doing now, while it's certainly helping to control the situation, it's creating a massive economic nightmare that's about to hit. And we don't
Right.
know about that either.
Right.
So I think it's the uncertainty, and I think it's the uncertainty that is affecting people's mental well-being, and how they're spending their time and what they're worried about, because they can't control it
Right.
and can't
Right.
process it and can't plan for it. It that makes it entirely different.
So how have you been advising clients? I mean, if it's that difficult for us as consumers and humans generally, to really plan or think ahead or know what we would do or might do, how do you, beyond this idea of having that community orientation, being out there first, getting some credit for it, what else do you perhaps you see brands doing that you admire, or you're encouraging some of the clients you serve to do more of or think about?
We're having conversations literally every day, and it started 7-8 weeks ago, and it's still going strong now, of how do we repurpose your assets, your brand assets, or your organization's assets to help communities. And how do you take a look at your assets in a much broader sense? It's not just the media money that you would have spent on advertising. It's not just the distribution channels you have, but literally, what are the assets that you have? Do you have parking lots that could be put to use? Do you have space that can be put to use? Do you have money that can be put to use? Do you have expertise that can be put to use? And we're working with clients to really kind of repurpose that and put it towards something that will give back to the community, while keeping, quite honestly, the brand top of mind and keeping the brand relevant and showing folks that the brand is showing up. One of my favorite examples is one of our clients. It's been written up, so I feel comfortable talking about it, is Country Crock, which is an item that's used for baking. We literally, within the first week of the crisis, they said, we want to do something, we want to do something, we want to do something. And we went through okay, what assets do you have? What can we leverage? And what's going on in the world right now? And one of the things we picked up really quickly, so they're a baking ingredient, was all of these kids who are celebrating birthdays stuck at home.
Yep.
And in many cases, their parents are losing their jobs. So to go out and spend a lot of money on a birthday cake and a birthday party, just not happening. And all these small businesses, small bakeries closing because demand, they either had to close or demand was shrinking. So we literally went around the country and found local bakeries and gave them support money just to make birthday cakes and just to deliver them to kids who maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to celebrate a birthday. To me, that is such a great example, a micro example, but such a powerful example of using your assets for good. And imagine the top of mind awareness and loyalty that's going to come from that after this is all over.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some sense that the brands people perceive as having been there for them during this crisis, and I think that's true for the brands you work for as well. There's a strong sense that employees are looking from their employers to operate in that way, to be there for them, to support them. That maybe that will have that resonance going forward, and I get a sense too that it's sort of in concert with this general development. I know you and I have talked about in the past about this shift towards purpose and brands trying to figure out, what their position is on certain topics or what they stand for. Have you seen some acceleration in those discussions, or have you seen people sort of going back to the well a bit and saying, all right, well, we all met on this last year. We decided what we believe in. And, how, I guess the question I'm leading to is, how solid are some of those commitments? Because it has been questioned by some that these commitments everybody signed up for at Davos and the roundtable, etc., might not be quite as solid now. So what's your perspective?
I don't think the commitments are going away. And I don't think anybody's going to step away from their efforts towards sustainability and climate change and clean water and a lot of the things that they had committed to, a lot of things coming out of the UN. I don't think that's going to go away, but I do think it's sort of sitting there now for a moment while we repurpose purpose. And if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some of those things are a little higher on the pyramid. Versus, are my employees safe? Do people have access to public health? Is the supply chain intact? How's mental health and mental well-being? So we're seeing a lot of purpose become more, we like to joke, like small p purpose,
Right.
very local, fundamental, maybe not temporary, but like solving a problem right now that needs to get solved so that hopefully we can move on beyond it. So no one's walking away from the higher order purpose because that's not going away either. But there is a bit of a temporary shift in like, wow, we got some problems right at hand that we've got to solve for.
Yeah, that's a very interesting development, actually, to be honest. It might have helped the whole purpose driven movement in a sense, to give it more focus and something more concrete, that it's pushed people to think about how they're actually going to make that real. That's an interesting, I like the idea of small p purpose. That's very, very interesting. We could teach that. I think that's good. And what other sort of domains then are, what there's a discussion that I've heard a lot of people talking about, that it's sort of the crisis has sort of accelerated things that were perhaps happening anyway, or were maybe dormant. Have you seen clients maybe being more comfortable to take some risks, or perhaps more comfortable to invest in areas that they kind of knew they ought to, but hadn't got round to? Is there any sort of that sense of acceleration or experimentation? Or
I think probably the one biggest thing is clients getting more comfortable. The way I like to phrase it is stepping away from their products or their services and getting comfortable with talking about social issues, contributing back to communities where you're not necessarily pushing or promoting your product, taking a stand and taking credit for work that you're doing. We have seen a shift in that. Clients being more comfortable, realizing that it's not as much of a risk. In fact, I had many conversations with clients where we talked about risk, and basically I said, the risk is not doing anything. At this point, doing something has almost zero risk. Because if you mess it up or you're a little off, no one's going to blame you because you tried in the middle of this mess that we're in.
Yeah.
But you do nothing, and that's risky. Or you try to push your product still. That's risky. So that's been a pretty big change. Clients getting more and more comfortable. And one thing that I've taken great heart in watching, which is probably a fundamental that maybe we got lost along the way, is a refocus on employees and making sure that you're taking care of your own first, realizing that they are part of the community and they are brand ambassadors. And if they're not taken care of, then how are you going to take care of somebody else?
Right.
A real shift towards, how do we make sure our employees are safe and connected and, engaged with each other and feeling a part of the company, even though they're all working remotely. That's been a really pretty cool shift, and something that PR agencies actually, that's an area that we really do own in terms of a work stream.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, some of those themes are very consistent with perhaps where the whole stakeholder capitalism movement was going, to enfranchise more than your shareholders. They are, employees, customers, etc. And also perhaps this idea that you see in some of the work like Edelman's Trust Barometer, that people really look to their own companies to give, so they trust their companies perhaps more than they do media or government, etc. And it's an interesting role. Let's talk a little. I would love to pick up that theme about PR folks being kind of in a driver's seat there, because and I've had these discussions about sort of that blending or merging of PR and marketing, and what do you feel has been, or the unique contribution of the PR, the chief communications officers in the C-suite? Where do you feel they've really been leading and shining?
Well, I think when you think about it in its purest form, PR people are naturally comfortable with news, and they're naturally comfortable acting fast, grabbing a news cycle, running with it, and kind of using it to promote whatever they're trying to promote. And if you think about it in a very pure kind of objective way, that's exactly what's been happening now for 8 weeks in the US and for months around the world. It's a news cycle. It's, it's agile marketing. It's thinking fast, pivoting quickly, adjusting as things are changing, which is, every day. PR people are just naturally used to that, and they know how to deal with it, and it doesn't they actually expect it, I think, more than
Right.
anything. So
Right.
that's where we've been able to shine. And I also think that PR people are used to constituent mapping. You know, they're not just focused on consumers, they're focused on consumers and employees and analysts and investors and suppliers and the entire ecosystem. That's something that also comes very naturally to us. And I say that having not grown up in PR, it's something that I really admire about the last few years I've been in this particular discipline is that ecosystem is really fascinating to work with.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, that they've learned how to balance lots of competing different constituencies in order and find a through line, which represents the best of what the company stands for, etc.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
very, very interesting. Yeah. What do you see then as perhaps some of the more permanent, implications or residual effects of the crisis? I've been asking people this question about what's changed fundamentally about human behavior, but it's an unfair question. I mean, everybody who studies these things will say you can't really read consumer research and in a situation like this, where frankly our behaviors today are compelled upon us. Yes, it's not that
Right.
we're not all choosing to do the things we're doing. So it's a little hard to read, and consumers are notoriously bad at telling you what they will do in the future. But any maybe a fairer question is to ask about sort of like trends you're looking at either in the workplace or consumer buying, or just kind of habits that you're paying attention to, that you think might be interesting and worth keeping an eye on.
So I'll answer that probably in two ways. First, from a overall consumer behavior perspective, I think that the one thing that has been a permanent shift is dealing with uncertainty, as I was talking about before. We're just not going to be in a situation where you know what's going to happen. So from a marketing standpoint, the notion of writing a 3-year strategic plan, I don't know how you could possibly do that. You could have a strategic vision for your brand or your business, but a strategic plan, I wouldn't even begin to know how to be able to write a plan. Yeah, we're going to be living month by month, quarter by quarter from a marketing standpoint. And consumers are getting increasingly, I do think, more and more adept, maybe not comfortable, but adept at dealing with the uncertainty. Planning for the fall semester, but like understanding that the fall semester might not look the way it used to look, or planning for holidays, but it might not look like you thought it was going to look like. And then I think from a marketing standpoint, one of the trends, if you want to call it that I found really fascinating, is kind of a refocus on customer service, and redefining what customer service is. And customer service isn't just, the automated system when you call and you punch number 5 to get, to get your account balance. Like real customer service, curbside pickup, with your safety in mind, and selecting items that you need to solve your problems at home, and travel assistance. I was just on the phone today with American Express, actually, on a trip that I had planned that got canceled. And they were, I would say American Express has always been service oriented, but they were so service oriented, and so accommodating and so kind and so gentle. And I hung up and I was like, I felt better. Like I felt better about the world based on that interaction. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that. If you're going to survive in this world as a brand, you're going to have to be in service mode.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting, and that fun. I mean, I feel like people have found a new gear in different places. There's lots of there's lots of one of the things I think is that there's a sort of formalities that shifted away from a lot of the ways we relate to each other, and maybe I even segue to your experience as a dad, your experience as a teacher. That we all suddenly figured out, it was a bit like the Wizard of Oz, that there was nothing behind the curtain, and we suddenly I'm still cheating and I have a curtain behind me because it's just way too messy, but that there was sort of like we could let the guard down a little bit, just be nice to each other, get on with things, and be human. I mean, I am just deeply impressed by how many people I see now with their kids, and just it's just natural. Yeah, your partner's going to walk behind you in the middle of the Zoom,
Yeah.
and it's not sort of some big, faux pas anymore. It's just how we're all living. So, what's your experience been more? I know you're raising kids, and that's a whole experience. And then you've had the charge of these young emerging professionals at our school this semester. And any thoughts about what's on their mind or your experience in those roles?
Well, interesting. My kids are both in their mid-20s. In the start of their careers. My son works at a PR agency in New York and has shifted to working at home. My daughter's a marriage and family therapist, so she very quickly shifted to all video
Right.
sessions, which was a really interesting pivot. Like overnight, just switched and found ways to make that actually even more meaningful because in a video setting, maybe you'll be a little more willing to open up and a little more comfortable talking than maybe you might be one-on-one. So I think that, in the teaching environment, I mean, it was a hard semester. I'll be the first to admit that first class over Zoom was hard. I found it hard. I found it
Right.
hard getting people to engage. I know they found it hard, but we kind of adjusted. And I remember after the third one, the first one was awful. In fact, I remember telling my husband, "Oh my God, that was just an awful class. I was horrible," And then the second week, I was like, "Oh, okay. I think that was okay, like passable." The third one was like nailed it, and I was so happy, because we just all kind of figured out how to get through it. And I think that's probably the biggest positive thing I've seen through all of this, whether it's at school and learning or work or socializing. We've all just kind of adjusted. Something as simple as the virtual happy hour. We can't come see each other, but we can hop on a video and still have a drink together and still talk to each other and still commiserate and support each other. The way everybody has shifted so quickly is just sort of a very positive outcome of the human spirit.
No, I share that. I'm somewhat skeptical about how much of this is permanent or changes or sort of informs us moving forward, but it's clearly evident it all just happened, that people were more or are more generous to each other, more giving, early on in the process when we were sort of starting to try and think about how we retrain everybody and get everybody on. I was in some webinar and the instructor said, we've all just got to give each other a little bit more grace. She was like, and I thought it was a great word.
Cut me a break. Yeah.
It was like, give me a break. Exactly. I really like that. And I think it's true. And I think there's a resourcefulness that I found certainly among our faculty who've been phenomenal, to sort of get up to speed and an understanding, as you said, that, this might be a little bit messy at first, but we'll figure it out together. Any thoughts maybe one of the things obviously, and as well as I, on the minds of our students is clearly they're entering a very difficult and challenging world economically and may well not have an opportunity to work immediately in an internship or take up a job. I mean, obviously, you're welcome to speak a little bit about it. The PR Council's done this amazing thing that's going to launch a little later, bringing agencies together. But more generally, thoughts about what students should be doing, thinking about preparing. How do you use this time? How do you keep the momentum going?
I think the biggest thing would be to just keep learning. I'm sure the last thing that any of our students want to do when the semester is over is to sign up for another class or dig into another online program where you're in learning mode. But if you can't work because it's not available yet, then learn something that maybe you're not so good at, that you didn't really think you liked that much, or is the opposite end maybe of a strength you have. Dig into that and get really good at it and really comfortable with it. Because even if it ultimately isn't what you'll end up doing, it will make you better. I remember when I was enrolled in my MBA program years ago, I forced myself to get a dual major of marketing and finance. Not because I considered myself a finance guy, but because I knew as a marketing person, I had to be adept at it. And I forced myself. and force myself to get comfortable with it, even though I maybe never really liked it, but just wanted it to not be something I didn't understand. And to this day, it has helped me because
Yeah.
I'm super comfortable with it. I can dance around a P&L as good as anybody, even though it might not be my career choice. So just keep learning, dive in, take advantage of programs like the PR Council that you mentioned. We gave birth to this idea solely because we knew that going into the summer, there's likely to be very few summer internships, very few people starting a job remotely at a new agency. So how do we help this next generation at least get ready when there is a job? And so we started this certificate program where all of these agency leaders are going to teach classes. And at the end of the summer, you'll get a certificate that says, these agency leaders think you are ready for an agency job. I mean, that's a great way to spend the summer. If you can't get a summer internship and you can't get a job, just learn and network and try to get yourself ready.
Yeah, no, I think it's a phenomenal initiative, and we're very happy. I think a number of our students are now engaged and signed up, and it's just a generally good idea. And speaks, I think, probably more broadly to the kind of partnerships between industry and academia that we need to develop, and these sort of professional and applied opportunities that we're very much about. That's what we stand for at the school. Anyway, well, absolute delight to chat.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you sharing some of your perspective, which is always original and fresh and appreciated. And I understand you get like a week off and then you're back in the class again.
Summer starts soon, that's for sure.
Summer starts soon. Well, I wish
Yeah.
you and the family well, and
You too,
stay
Michael.
safe and healthy, and yep, really good stuff. So,
Yeah.
all
Awesome.
right.
Thanks.